today's focus is on Pathway 6. I'm excited to spend some time just thinking about some of the examples and highlights of what it takes to expand and accelerate environmental restoration and stewardship efforts. And as you get settled, we're really curious to hear a little bit more from you. So as we get started, if you want to jump over to the chat and share why this pathway is important to you, we'd love to hear why you're here today. Is it that you want to learn more about some of the specific examples that we're going to highlight? Is it that you have successes that you'd like to share? And you're welcome to tell a little bit about your work in the chat and make that part of the collective story. We're also interested if you have additional resources or links to your work. So feel free to share any of that in the chat as we get settled. It's just a way to make sure that we're building that connection and really celebrating all the good work that's happening across the state. Our agenda for today is really engaging, and it's also pretty straightforward. So I just want to jump in and give you a little bit of a roadmap for our time. Going to start here in a second by introducing Deputy Secretary Megan Hurdle. She's going to share some opening remarks around this pathway and how it's part of that overall picture of how the state is advancing the 30 by 30 effort. From there, we're going to invite a conversation with 3 different partnership efforts to really share their stories in advancing progress around this Pathway 6. The first one is going to be around forest restoration activities, and we're going to hear from some of the leadership voices from the Redwoods Rising team on the North Coast. Then we're going to take a look at some of the watershed scale restoration efforts that are occurring in the Pescadero watershed and how that work is really occurring across multiple scales in really compelling ways. And then we wanted to take some time to focus on what's happening in our ocean landscapes as well as our terrestrial landscapes. And so we're really glad to feature a story here on kelp restoration today. I think I got the order of those flipped. So I'm going to leave it up to Megan to guide that conversation when we get to those stories. As we go and hear those different examples and the insights and lessons that those different partnerships want to bring forward, invite you to just share any questions that you have. You can jump over to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or if you want to put a comment or a question in the chat, a couple of us in the background will be monitoring those fields for your questions and insights. We're going to hopefully have some time after their stories to engage in a little bit of discussion and interaction with them. We're going to close out our time together hearing a series of lightning talks that feature key resources that we think can help you advance your work moving forward. We really want to make sure that these webinars are actionable and that we're providing not just great stories and insights, but specific resources that can help support the work as we move forward. And then we'll just close things out with a few high-level takeaways and observations and an invitation for you to continue to stay connected and involved as we move forward. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over here to Deputy Secretary Hurdle. As many of you know, she's come on board in the last several months and has really stepped in and embraced all the different dimensions of her work. And getting to work with her on this 30 by 30 partnership, I can see how important it is to her in advancing her overall objectives and strategies on behalf of CNRA, but also just those broader goals that we have as a state. So Deputy Secretary Hurdle, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sean, and I appreciate the introduction as well as your willingness to let me reorder the presenters and keep us all on our toes. So welcome everyone to our 30 by 30 Pathway 6 webinar today on expanding and accelerating environmental stewardship. We really appreciate you joining, and also a big thank you for all the work that you're doing as part of 30 by 30 movement to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. It's because of the work on the ground that you are doing to conserve and restore and steward lands in California that we continue to lead the country in this effort, and we are setting examples across the world as a subnational that has been working on this and really using all of our resources to try to achieve this important objective. So Pathway 6 is one of the 10 pathways, hopefully you can see this with my background, or strategies that were identified as being essential to achieving 30 by 30 in California. These strategies were identified through an extensive 18-month public process, and they came out in this book, which I know you all have on your kitchen tables and your nightstands. that lay out 10 strategies for how we in California are going to work together to reach this ambitious target. So we have been using this webinar series to periodically dive deep into one of those strategies or pathways. And today we're going to talk about pathway 6. So we're really excited to have an impressive group of restoration practitioners and partner agencies here to talk about on-the-ground examples of accelerating restoration and stewardship. And we purposely paired the restoration practitioner with an agency because we thought it would be incredibly interesting to hear about how two sides of this work are really necessary to come together to get this work done at a landscape scale. As you all know, California's 30 by 30 has 3 key objectives. It's protecting and restoring biodiversity, expanding equitable access to nature, and mitigating and building resilience to climate change. To achieve these objectives, it is not enough to just set aside or conserve or protect lands. We know that many of these places need active restoration. They need stewardship and management to really be able to provide both the biodiversity, the climate, and even the public access benefits that we're aiming for on these lands. So we're going to have 3 examples, as was teed up earlier, and we've challenged our presenters today to share what they saw as essential to the success, but also to talk about where they hit some bumps in the roads and why it's really important to build partnerships and coalitions to be able to do this work at scale. And as Sean said earlier, don't sign off early because at the end of the webinar, we're going to hear from Department of Fish and Wildlife, Regional Water Quality Control Board, and Sustainable Conservation on some of the tools that are out there right now for you to use on the ground to help facilitate and streamline the important work of restoration and management. So again, from a process standpoint, we are going to hear from 3 projects. I ask that you put your questions in chat or write them down. After we go through these 3 example projects, we will take some time to have a discussion with the audience and hear across all of the presenters, and then we'll transition into that lightning round of tools. So first up, we're actually going to start in the ocean on the salty side of 30 by 30, as we like to say it, which feels really appropriate since all of us came from the ocean and all life came from the ocean to start with. So I'm really pleased today to introduce Tristan Anus McHugh from the Nature Conservancy and Pike Spector from the Ocean Protection Council to talk to us about kelp restoration. So please go ahead and join me on screen. Tristan is a subtitle ecologist and a kelp forest restoration practitioner in Mendocino. When we had our planning call for this, I want you all to know that she showed up fresh from a dive in the ocean. So I know that I'm leaving you with a real expert here to talk about this. And Pike is Ocean Protection Council's biodiversity program manager and a self-professed, let's see if I can say this right, Pike, thalassophile. You can correct me when you come off mute. If you don't know what that is, which I did not, please take a moment to Google that. I think it's super cool to have learned a new word, and what a great thing to be, Pike. So really excited to have both of you here to talk with us today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Deputy Secretary. And indeed, you did pronounce that correctly, self-professed indeed. So good morning, all. I'm Pike Spector. As Deputy Secretary Hertel said, I'm the Biodiversity Program Manager for the Ocean Protection Council. We are a cabinet-level state policy body whose mission is to protect California's coast and ocean. I am joined here by Tristan Anus McHugh from the Nature Conservancy in California, who will provide a deeper dive into in-water kelp forest restoration shortly. Next slide, please. California's kelp forests are among the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. Kelp forests provide a variety of ecological functions and ecosystem services and can even provide climate resilience benefits. Studies have highlighted the importance of kelp forests for ecosystem connectivity along the coast, and they help support economically and ecologically important species. Kelp forests also hold cultural significance for California Native American tribes. Unfortunately, these systems are under threat from climate change. Next slide, please. As a result of unusually warm waters and other climate-driven impacts, including an explosion in populations of kelp-eating purple sea urchins, more than 95% of the bull kelp in Northern California was lost between 2014 and 2019, devastating the region's biodiversity and economy. You can see this dramatic decline in the top panel of the figure on the right, which shows the extent of kelp canopy at the ocean's surface over time. The dashed line indicates the onset of an unprecedented marine heatwave in 2014. Recovery on the North Coast has been severely limited since 2019. In Central and Southern California, kelp loss has been patchier and less widespread, but some areas, such as the Monterey Peninsula, are showing concerning declines. Next slide, please. Catalyzed by the near total kelp canopy collapse on the North Coast, California is taking bold action to conserve, restore, and protect biodiversity, bolster climate resilience, and maintain ecosystem services. In 2021, the state released a kelp action plan containing strategies and opportunities to address the kelp crisis. And so far, OPC has invested more than $10 million to implement the action plan, including monitoring kelp forest health, improving our understanding of kelp loss and recovery, and testing restoration approaches. Here, I will focus on two of the top priorities in the kelp action plan: policy development and restoration. Next slide, please. To continue moving the needle forward, the state released an enhanced status report for giant and bull kelps and issued a precautionary closure for bull kelp harvest on the North Coast to help aid in natural recovery. Last year, California took a major step forward by launching the development of a statewide, ecosystem-based, and adaptive kelp restoration and management plan. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, in partnership with OPC, is working to ensure that this statewide plan, which builds on the action plan, is informed by the best available science, community input, and tribal perspectives. Next slide, please. This novel ecosystem-based plan for kelp forests supported by giant kelp, Macrocystis pyrifera, and bull kelp, Nereocystis lutkiana, will provide a science-based framework for managing, protecting, and restoring kelp forests in the face of changing ocean conditions. Next slide, please. The plan will build out a comprehensive management framework for kelp forests across the state, incorporating restoration as a critical component in a suite of management options to ensure that these communities are sustainably managed into the future. This can be thought of as a fisheries management plan plus, in that it will go beyond essential elements of a fisheries management plan as defined in the Marine Life Management Act, and will include an adaptive kelp harvest framework, a restoration toolkit, and an overarching ecosystem-based management approach. The latter two components are entirely novel. To date, no state fishery management plan has attempted to incorporate these elements, but such bold and innovative management strategies are essential for meeting the urgency of the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Since 2023, we have initiated a multi-pronged approach to developing the KRMP, consisting of a community working group, a science advisory committee, and a tribal engagement strategy that is integrated through a variety of channels. In order to ensure that the development of the KRMP is grounded in the best available science and is responsive to the needs of the state, including California Native American tribes, active partnerships and collaborations are underway with key state and federal agencies to ensure the KRMP facilitates streamlined and effective management, including restoration upon implementation. Next slide, please. In the interim, as we work towards building a restoration toolkit for the KRMP, we've developed invaluable partnerships with in-water restoration practitioners and affiliated collaborators. Recently, an unprecedented partnership-based restoration effort on the North Coast from 2020 to 2022 successfully engaged commercial red urchin fishermen to restore kelp at 2 sites in Mendocino County. You'll hear more about those efforts shortly. California is rapidly emerging as a global leader in kelp restoration. We are now engaging regularly with restoration practitioners from around the world to share best practices and lessons learned. Next slide, please. As we chart a course to resilience, we know that the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss require us to act with urgency to protect and restore kelp forests. However, kelp forest restoration is an emerging science with many unknowns. To balance these realities, California has adopted a learn-by-doing approach. By continuing ongoing, meaningful engagement with California Native American tribes, addressing remaining knowledge gaps, supporting actions while state policy is being developed, and completing the kelp restoration and management plan in an accelerated timeframe, we are building out our portfolio of solutions, offering a lifeline to some of the most vulnerable communities on our coast, and ensuring the resilience of our iconic kelp forests into the future. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it over to Tristan, who will now talk about exciting in-water restoration on the North Coast.
Awesome. Thank you, Pike. That was great, and great framing for what I'm about to share. Can you see my screen still okay? And you can hear me? Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tritz Anush McHugh, and I'm the Kelp Project Director with the Nature Conservancy. And it's truly an honor to be here today to speak with you about some of the work that we're leading here in experimental work that we're leading up here in Northern California. And I'm especially proud to share with you a big group project we're doing titled Accelerating Bull Kelp Ecosystem Recovery in a Recently Deforested Location in Northern California by using a strategic sequence of restoration techniques and community participation. So before digging into the details, I must start by acknowledging the global context to which this work is placed. Kelps and the ecosystems they provide cover a third of the Earth's coastlines, and these losses are being experienced globally, similar to many other habitats that we have known and love. So yet, our story in Northern California of kelp loss is notoriously known as an example due to the recency, the severity, rapidness, and sustained losses. And this is highlighted in the first ever kelp restoration guidebook that you can see here on the slide. And so as such, over the past few years, our team has been working diligently with scientists and people all over the world to not only bring in lessons learned from other geographies, as they have different timescales. Some communities have been working with loss of kelp for decades, others like us just a few years, right? So there's a different scale of time and different scale of learning here. And so as we are learning in California, we prioritize also sharing what we learned with this global community of practice to really move the needle in this holistic way. And so of importance, though, this also stems back to what Pike had mentioned about developing tools for the toolkit for the kelp restoration and management plan. So that's really where we're focusing here today. And so in California, our in-water work to date has really focused on protecting and defending the remaining 4% of kelp refugia and lead in developing tools for the toolkit through human-mediated grazer suppression and kelp enhancement. Of significance, just this last year, our team developed the techniques to grow kelp from seed to reproductive adult for the first time in an open coast system, which was a major breakthrough. It may seem simple, you go out and you do this work in the ocean, but it's challenging, it's cold, it's rough, visibility is poor, it's a little sharky. You know, there are all these conditions that you have to consider when you're doing in-water kelp recovery work. And so kind of like building off this thought here of this breakthrough we had, to date, these bull kelp restoration projects in California have really focused on testing single independent methods at either one at a time or small scale, and have yet to combine these best practices to demonstrate how an integrated science-based and adaptive approach may in fact accelerate and scale restoration. And so together, our thought here is that both grazer suppression with native purple sea urchin and kelp enhancement in these targeted locations that were chosen very, very carefully could create these synergistic effects when they're strategically combined. And so to increase our success, a mosaic of in-water techniques and coordinated community engagement are necessary to revitalize the biodiversity, economy, and workforce opportunities. Because we also know that doing any form of habitat recovery not only takes an understanding of ecological levers and tools, but also social acceptance and our ability to really, have an idea as a community of how we want to move forward. So we also know that early intervention is key to successful restoration, both ecologically, again, and culturally. So digging into this thought, this once lush, I had mentioned 90, and Pike had mentioned 96% of kelp loss along 350 kilometer of coastline, we're really left with about 4%. And so this once lush, beautiful high priority refugia location in Mendocino is unfortunately undergoing a phase shift from kelp forest into urchin barren. And the biodiversity at this location specifically has decreased significantly. And so what you're looking at here is a kelp canopy map with the years from 2020 to 2023. And so to explain this graphic, at the core of our work, a kelp refugia location, part of that surviving 4%, has experienced an 84% decrease in kelp canopy over the past 2 years, with this year being the most dramatic decline. The impacts of this rapid ecosystem shift underscores truly the connections between people and nature, that humans interact with the sea through experience, food, art, and storytelling. And so truly in the spirit of scaling and accelerating kelp recovery, as Pike had mentioned, we've organized 12 multidisciplinary organizations and people with aligned goals and objectives to collaborate in this experimental project to develop a coordinated approach to restore and protect 5 acres of recently degraded kelp ecosystem habitat at Big River. So digging into the specifics of what we're doing here, we are going to be building on previous investments by the state and the Nature Conservancy. And our project proposal is advancing this integrated approach by implementing a strategic sequence of restoration techniques, grazer suppression, and kelp enhancement to stimulate kelp recovery. So specifically, we will harvest sea urchin by hand and with traps to create space on the sea floor, again, in very targeted and very siloed places from this experimental approach. And then we will be catalyzing vegetative recovery through kelp enhancement practices. So essentially seeding the sea floor with novel techniques also, such as the Archev unit that you can see here on this slide. So our team is trying to come up and put our biggest, best, boldest approaches and lessons learned in the water. In addition to that, we'll be investigating sea urchin fishery adaptation and its implications for recovery and blue economy opportunities, because we want to close the loop, right? So we will be working to understand how workforce opportunities have changed. And as we harvest urchin and work with the fleet, individuals, and private business, we want to find uses for purple urchin through food and non-food to create that circular restoration practice. And then lastly, and very importantly, we want to create community participation methods to increase likelihood of restoration success. And so we plan to provide paid opportunities to build our North Coast scuba dive capacity. And we're also hosting the first ever North Coast Kelp Fest, which is going on right now. And we just kicked it off this last weekend, and it's awesome. Please do join us if you can. And this event is highlighting food, art, science, and film, and trying to bring in a diversity of thought around kelp. And then lastly, we're working with the city of Fort Bragg and Noyo Harbor District to mobilize a blue economy for our rural community here in the Mendocino coast. And so I'll close out here by saying, despite the devastating impacts of kelp loss globally and locally, and how cold the water is and how challenging, we truly cannot afford to lose any more forests inland or underwater. And so this work is not easy. We're visitors in the underwater system, and we're learning, and we hope to be able to provide some kind of insight to the tools that are available to us, and then come together as a community and decide what and how we want to move forward. And so we are highly motivated to facilitate this revival through these grassroots efforts that are holistic in approach, and develop these solutions that work for both people and place, and in support of the state's initiatives as well. So thank you all, and I will stop sharing screen.
That was great. Thank you so much, Pike and Tristan. I have to tell you, as someone who is not a diver, really incredible to be able to see the video and the photos from under the water. It really helps tell the story of the biodiversity loss that we've experienced in some of these areas, and the techniques that you're using to bring those back to life, and how you're working with the community. So appreciate that. As a reminder, we are going to bring Pike and Tristan back on at the end of the 3 projects that we're hearing from. So please go ahead and continue to put your questions in the Q&A for us. We're capturing them. We will try to get as many as possible in front of them. So from the ocean side, we are now going to move inland, and we're going to hear about forest restoration and management that is being done through the Redwoods Rising Collective. So redwoods are one of those iconic California landscapes that no matter how many times I visit, I always walk away like feeling incredibly inspired, and honestly feeling like I've been somewhere magical. And I also know from family members and friends who are not Californians who visit here that the first thing they often want to see is a redwood. So on behalf of all of us, I just really want to thank the folks that are working in this landscape, because it is so iconic and essential to what makes California, California. So really pleased to have with us today from California State Parks, Roz Litsky and Ben Blum from Save the Redwoods League. Roz is a planning and environmental compliance manager for the North Coast Redwoods districts of California State Parks. and has spent roughly 20 years working across consulting and public service and NGOs to do great things in our environment, which we really appreciate. Ben is the Director of Stewardship and Restoration at Save the Redwoods League and focuses on large-scale projects that are bringing back redwoods and giant sequoias. So really appreciate the work that you both do. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
So first, just making sure people can hear me. Ben, can you nod? Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to present and speak about Redwoods Rising. I think I wanted to make sure that this is, that we're thinking and expressing that type of gratitude and hoping that people in the audience can learn something about our process that they can take with them and apply for any future efforts. So next slide. Okay, so as background for Redwoods Rising, Redwood National and State Parks is home to 45% of the remaining old growth coast redwoods, and it's located in Humboldt and Del Norte counties. However, nearly 2/3, some 80,000 acres, were clear cut or commercially logged before this land was protected. These were often replanted with a single species and were intended for repeated harvest according to commercial logging cycles. The trees oftentimes are dense and spindly as they compete for the limited resources. And I think this picture is very jarring because you can see that we also inherited like hundreds of miles of eroding and inaccessible logging roads that are failing. They're going into stream crossings. In one watershed in particular, we just saw that the watershed was like mostly buried under sediment as, at that time, people were trying to access and try to harvest those large trees. And so we also see that there's very limited riparian area, or we see limited trees in these riparian areas that support aquatic habitat. Next slide. So the good news and reason for the project is that Redwoods Rising's collaborative shares a vision to conduct watershed restoration by accelerating the recovery of these previously logged second growth forests, which builds the resiliency to climate change. As we know, redwood forests are particularly great at storing carbon, and removing those old logging roads will also create that additional forest floor. Redwoods Rising was officially launched in the spring of 2018. It's a public-private partnership among National Park Service through Redwood National Park, California State Park, which includes 3 state parks up here on the North Coast, and Save the Redwoods League. So Redwoods Rising really builds upon the restoration work that's been completed by parks in the past and brings this effort to more of a landscape level. It's like a unified approach. So instead of doing like a bunch of smaller projects in different ways, we're trying to bring them all together and really harness that power of the different organizations, our skills, abilities, funds, and you name it, anything we can take. So next slide. Oh, sorry. I think I got lost in my slides, so I'm going to go one back then. So I just want to point out some of the main restoration techniques that we use. Just briefly to just say that we are doing some restoration thinning, so removing some of those trees. We're doing road removal by these inaccessible and failing roads, by creating natural topography that was once there. And then we're also going to be installing large wood into our creeks and streams. Sorry, next slide now. So in order to understand the permitting pathway, it's helpful to know which resources are present and what we were addressing during our environmental plans. So for birds, that's the federally listed marble and murrelet, northern spotted owl, raptors, and migratory nesting birds. For mammals, that's the federally listed fisher and Humboldt martin. We have special status bats, many fish species such as coho, steelhead, coastal cutthroat. We have amphibians. We don't have any federal or state listed plant species, but we do have many California rare plant ones. And then of course, sensitive natural communities such as the redwood forest. So Additionally, I think it's important to acknowledge that we think about our resource management holistically, whereas cultural and natural resources are as one and not separate. We think about this because we're in the ancestral areas of the Yurok, Tolowa, and Kupa people. And so we recognize the interconnectedness of this and seek ways to coordinate through consultation and project development with tribal partners and seeing them as the original stewards of the land. And I think it's important to acknowledge. So thinking about back to environmental compliance in 2018, when this started, the thinking was, let's go big. But what does that really mean? And so how we contemplated this aspect was that we wanted to think about how much work we can do. So whereas Redwoods Rising encompasses all of the 80,000 areas or 80,000 acres of forested lands, we wanted to start in 2 geographies, one in Humboldt and one in Del Norte County. And so we prepared 2 environmental documents, which are a hybrid initial study and environmental assessment. One of the big partnership benefit from the permitting side is being able to have National Park Service as the lead federal agency, and then also having state parks as the lead state agency. And then at the time when we started this, I was also employed with Save the Redwoods League, leading this effort because it's my background. So it was really, truly a very coordinated effort that we were able to employ because an aspect of this project is partnership and capacity building. So trying to, so if we're going to do more, how do we do it together? And so that was one of the many ways. And so in thinking about the project and in contemplation of how this would be received by the public, we decided very intentionally to try to describe the limits of the work that we were gonna do. So I think these are fairly common to many projects, but it's like in-water seasonal requirements. But also we wanted to grapple with what type of size tree removal, like how big is too big and what kind of forests are we looking at? Because some of them are very small or they're very small diameter. But how would the public contemplate this and what would be some of their concerns? Other things were like operation on slopes, wildlife retention trees, it goes on and on. So in some ways, I think the hardest part of the environmental document when you're working with this many people is describing the project. It's like, what can we live with? Like, what can we, how is it that we want to do it? But we were able to get there. And so we did circulate our environmental documents and we conducted a few public meetings and we received very minimal comments. I think we received like 6 on one document and 4 comment letters on another. And like 4 of the comment letters were in support of the project. So we were pleasantly surprised that this didn't create a lot of controversy. Sometimes I speculate as to why. I think maybe it's because we didn't include prescribed fire, which was very intentionally left out because we weren't sure. I mean, it's maybe a tool in the toolbox that we might think about at some point in the future, but it wasn't at that time because it wasn't an activity that we were going to propose right away. I don't know. Maybe it's Redwoods Rising was one of the founding partnerships, the California Landscape Stewardship Network, and we were just here on the North Coast ready for this type of project. I don't know, but I will take it because we were able to move forward. And so that brings me to now getting into just the brass tacks of permits and consultations. So we obtained a master streambed alteration agreement through Cal Fish and Wildlife. And so this was one permit that we can use for both our watersheds. It provides a lot of flexibility in regards to the type of work that we can do. And then we also received the first restoration management permit from Cal Fish and Wildlife under the Cutting Green Tape. So big shout out to Brad Henderson, Mike Van Hattem, and Nick Van Fleet that all worked on that. We also received a programmatic biological opinion from NIMS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is really helpful because it has a built-in variance process. So if there's some types of modifications we want to make, we were able to discuss these. It's really creating that relationship with those agencies. And we get the benefit of NPS being the lead and taking the lead in this space, and being able to have those conversations. We also got take for the project under the federal ESA. Again, another benefit of having NPS is that we did a federal consistency determination with the California Coastal Commission regarding the Coastal Zone Management Act for the few areas that are in the coastal zone. From the Regional Water Quality Control Board, we received a general water quality certification for aquatic resources or aquatic restoration. And then we received a waiver of waste discharge from waste discharge requirement for forestry and roads, and a regional general permit from the Army Corps. Lastly, we did receive programmatic agreement with SHPO. So we do survey all of our lands for cultural resources, but we have a research design that differentiates the intensity of survey that's based on the type of work proposed. So that's very high level, speeding through lots of nitty gritty details about the type of permitting approach. And now I want to speak to some of the lessons learned and how this might be applicable for other projects. So in thinking about a landscape level project and that it's going to be done over multiple decades, it's not something that it's like a one and done. It's ongoing. It's hard to see around corners, anticipate possible changes in technology or methods. I think one of the hallmarks of the project is that we're always trying to grow, both literally for our trees, but also figuratively with like how we want to do the work and how we want to advance it. And that, so you know, we got the permits, we got our consultations done, but now we're thinking about different ways to think about the project. And one of those examples is that in our environmental documents, we said, no, we're not going to do any in-water work for any of our access. So we're not going to, if we're going to be putting in bridges, we're not going to be doing, they're going to be temporary, and we're not going to do any of that in-water work. But then we had a project in one of our watersheds where really, if you're going to start doing in-water work, you really need to restore that floodplain because it's really damaging for the coho that need to be there. And so what we did was we worked with another nonprofit in the area to advance a project that did include the floodplain restoration that happens to be relocating the bridge. And we worked with Cal Fish and Wildlife to receive a CERP for that project rather than modifying our existing environmental documents. So this is also an example of when we started permitting the project at a point in time, there's a lot more options available to us that we didn't have at that point in time. So it's great to see how we might be able to think about other things as they change. Another big lesson that, actually, I don't know if it's a lesson or if it's just the way things are kind of idea, is that it's a lot of effort and staff that goes into all the various studies that we do and accomplish on behalf of the project. So we submit the pre and post implementation reports, but what backs that up is all of the people working on the rare plant surveys, the cultural surveys, the spotted owl surveys, like you name it, it's there. And so I think so there's a lot of people that go into the type of work and it's ongoing, but it's so rewarding. And so I think it's really important to keep our eye on the prize and not get bogged down. And as a planner, it's just always so amazing to see that the work is, happening and we're moving it forward. There's this thing we like to talk about, which is the Redwoods Rising Way, which describes, essentially our just like grit and determination and adaptability and flexibility to just keep going. So I think that's a good stopping point to segue into Ben, who's going to talk more about the implementation and the governance structure.
Thank you, Roz. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the work gets done and all that foundation that Roz laid out with the programmatic permitting and CEQA NEPA compliance really laid a foundation for us to now get a lot of work done and do it at scale and pace. So this picture is just showing the initial signing of the MOU with leaders from state parks, national parks, and Save the Redwoods League back in 2018. This is a long-term project. We're talking about decades of work. And so we're really embedded as a partnership in every way imaginable so that this can advance. And we're using and leveraging kind of the resources and flexibilities that each entity has to really make this work. But it's not just about those three entities and the leaders of those three entities. There's a huge, I call it like an ecosystem of people that are involved in this work. We like to talk about it as the restoration economy that we're creating on the North Coast as a result of this project. And because we're talking about a project that's going to take 30, 40 years to complete, we really need a whole ecosystem of people to be involved in making this all happen at the scale of tens of thousands of acres over years. So it takes a whole network of people to make it happen, as I said. So we have incredibly skilled contractors. The work that we're doing is technically extremely difficult because we're trying to do forest restoration, for example, with very minimal impacts to the ground and to our sensitive species. So it requires operators that know how to work and use really high tech equipment on the ground and really narrow the impacts of the work that we're trying to do. So those relationships with contractors, we consider them to be, pretty much part of the project. And Save the Redwoods League, as the holder of a lot of those contracts, we do have a lot of flexibility in terms of establishing long-term relationships as possible with the contractors that are doing the work on the ground. We also have to have a lot of boots on the ground from our agency staff and from Save the Redwoods League to oversee that work. We're talking about, several sides of contractors operating all at the same time in a limited operating window so that we minimize impacts to fish and wildlife. Biologists, hydrologists, geologists, all the people that are getting out there in advance of the work to identify project scope for each year as we approach that year. That's a huge part of it as well. The foresters also that are going out and timber cruising and identifying the next stands that need to be treated in some sort of prioritized way. That's all an incredible part of this process. We also have strong relationships with our partners in both with tribes. And in some cases, those tribes are actually implementing the work on the ground, which is a great part in terms of bringing our tribal partners into this work, both as a government-to-government consultation that occurred through the programmatic process that Roz mentioned, but also as implementers and providing jobs for the tribes. We really consider them as experts in this field. So using our tribal partners and their expertise to accomplish common goals related to this project. It also takes management and leadership in all three entities and creativity. And part of what I think of as the Redwoods Rising way that Roz talked about is when we run into problems and challenges, we don't kind of cry about it or stop or give up. We figure out a way around that obstacle and thinking creatively in terms of how we can leverage each organization's expertise and skills to make this all happen. Another part of the project that I think is really worth highlighting is our apprenticeship program. So we're training a new generation of people in restoration on the North Coast. We're in our 6th year of the Redwoods Rising Apprenticeship Program, which is run through a partnership with Cal Poly Humboldt and College of the Redwoods, our junior college on the North Coast. We've had 80 apprentices come through that program, and a lot of them go on to positions within agencies or with nonprofit partners or with tribes or with contractors. And so we're kind of building this broader community engagement with this project through this program. This year, we're continuing to expand the program over time. So this year, we'll have 16 apprentices working across 4 different disciplines. And those students are then bringing that expertise and experience back to their school and to their classmates. And we've also expanded the program into the Sierra this year. So it's been a really exciting part of the project that's pretty unique. We also have a governance structure that I think has been really important to ensuring kind of the integration of the 3 organizations. So we have an executive committee that's composed of people kind of at the higher levels of state parks, national parks, and Save the Redwoods League that provides, occasional leadership guidance. But we also have a leadership team that consists of the superintendents of Redwood National and State Parks and then myself. And then we have a steering committee that coordinates a lot of the work on the ground. We also have a communications committee that's involved with getting the message out to the public. And we've been incredibly successful in the last year in really expanding the reach of this partnership through social media and other means. And then we have technical committees that are actually overseeing, on the ground operations on the ground. terms of the way that this project is funded, it's also a unique model that relies on both private philanthropy, public funding, and then timber revenues or biomass returns that are being reinvested into the project. So as you can see, it's a mix of different funding sources. And Save the Redwoods League, as a nonprofit partner, brought a significant amount of private philanthropy in the beginning of the project to get it through permitting. But now at this point, that contribution is being dwarfed by the public contributions through grants and commitments from the agencies themselves, as well as the returns that we're getting from biomass returns that are feeding back into the project, but also providing an economic driver for the communities up there and providing timber to mills that keeps the mills alive and keeps our trucks and all of the operators involved in the work on the ground. So it's a unique mix of funding sources, and I expect that this pie chart will continue to evolve over time as we run into state budget crisis or federal budget crisis. We have the flexibility through the way that we're funding this project to be able to weather those sorts of bumps in the road on the finances side. In terms of progress to date, we've had 5 years of implementation. We've accomplished over 3,200 acres of forest restoration. We've removed 29 miles of road. We've improved 32 miles of road, including reinstalling and upgrading bridges across many of those miles. We've restored stream channels, removed stream crossings that were damaging downstream fish, and we've installed wood in several of the creeks on the project area to enhance salmonid habitat. So each one of those acres and miles is hard won, and it's incredibly complex work. But we're really excited and looking forward to accelerating the pace and scale of this work in the years ahead. So with that, I will turn it back over to Megan.
Thanks so much, Ben and Roz. I really appreciate it. We got some great questions coming in the Q&A for you. That a few of those will tee up in the discussion, but some of those I think you could pop on there now and provide some answers to. So we're going to move from our magnificent redwood forest. We're heading down the coast to the Central Coast to hear from Joe Pacharek from NOAA and Kellex Nelson from San Mateo RCD. And I'm excited about this portion of our presentation, not just because my favorite goat cheese farm is in Pescadero, but also because Kellex, who is Executive Director for San Mateo RCD, is a founding member of the California Landscape Stewardship Network, which has been a leader in working with California on the Cutting the Green Tape initiative. And you heard many of the things that have come from the Cutting the Green Tape initiative in that last presentation, as Roz walked through some of the permitting that they've taken advantage of to do landscape scale work. So Kellex, thrilled to have you here. Joe is a marine habitat resource specialist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Restoration Center. Joe, that is a mouthful. I'm sure you've had to practice that a few times when saying your title. Really excited to have both of you here to talk about the work that you envisioned and have achieved together in this space. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thank you. I think, Joe, do you wanna tee this up for us and talk a little bit about the area that we're going to be talking about?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Petrich. I work for a small part of National Marine Fisheries Service called the Restoration Center. We're about 150 people nationwide, and we just increased in California here from 8 to 13 people. So I cover kind of a small portion of California called the whole Central Coast, from Monterey through Mendocino counties. And one of the areas that I really love working in is San Mateo County. And then part of what we're going to talk about here today is really Pescadero Creek. And the reason why I feel, and a lot of people do, Pescadero Creek is so important is it is one of 2 independent watersheds in the most southern diversity strata for the endangered California coastal coho salmon. So what that means is it's one of the 2 largest watersheds in the most southern portion of where coho salmon exist, all the way from Alaska to Santa Cruz County. So coho salmon have been extirpated from Pescadero for more than 20 years, at least, that we knew about, which has changed in the last couple of years. And that's part of what we are going to talk about, which is immensely exciting and gratifying. But yeah, so with all these other, watersheds around it, what's so important about these independent watersheds is they anchor all these smaller watersheds around it. And one of the biggest reasons why this is so important is that as watersheds, and populations sort of decline, we definitely we made the choice to fight the battle of extirpation down. I want to fight it down here in Santa Cruz and San Antonio County, and I don't want that to become like Marin County, Sonoma County, and keep going up and down the coast too. So that's part of the reason that Pescadero is just it's so important in this context. Yeah. Alex.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here to talk about this case study, basically, of Pescadero watershed. I'm assuming that you all can see this. Yes. Yeah, great. Thanks. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about is in our partnership with NOAA, this sort of case study of accomplishing habitat restoration at scale. And of course, I'm going to be talking about the Pescadero watershed, and I'm with the Resource Conservation District, or RCD, in San Mateo County. But whenever I say we in this presentation, it doesn't just mean the RCD. We do everything in partnership. And so I'm going to show you what the RCD has done with many partners across public and private lands from the top to the bottom of this one watershed. And that includes the resource agencies, land trusts, county and state parks, farmers and ranchers, native stewards, community members. It's at the RCD, we believe that it takes a village to restore a watershed, and so let's go ahead and get into that. So this is just an orientation to this watershed. On the right, you see the redwoods. In the east, that's up at the top, the skyline, and it drains directly into the Pacific Ocean. There's two main creeks. That's Pescadero Creek along the north here, and Butno Creek along the south. This, and also to orient you to where this is about an hour south of San Francisco on the coast. And there are many protected species in this watershed, both plants and animals. We are working really hard to recover populations of California red-legged frog, San Francisco garter snake, marbled murrelets. These are among our priorities, but today I'm going to be focusing really zero in on these efforts to ensure the survival of anadromous fish. And these anadromous species, meaning those that migrate between the ocean and freshwater. People don't like to talk about our buddy, the lamprey on the right here, but lampreys count too, even if they're not very aesthetic for some of you. And then on the top left, we have steelhead trout, and on the bottom left, we've got the spawning Central Coast coho salmon that Joe mentioned. And not only do we care about these species for the individuals that they are, but they are also they play valuable roles not only in marine ecosystems, but also terrestrial ecosystems. Really exciting to me is some of the recent science that's showing the role of marine-derived nutrients in growing redwood trees from the decaying carcasses of coho salmon after they spawned. So there's a real connection. I mean, we all know it's all connected, but there's some very specific ways that it is. So what are these restoration projects? What do they look like? What are we doing? One thing is removing dams like this one. Removing dams in this watershed, or these barriers, has restored access to scores of miles of ancestral migration and spawning habitat, particularly helping fish reach some of the highest value habitat in the upper watershed that they have been blocked from reaching. Also, over the last 100 or more years, we humans have channelized and controlled and cleaned our creeks and rivers. We've removed wood and natural features, and we've tried to get water off the land, away from our properties, and that's resulted in streams becoming disconnected from the adjacent land, or floodplains. And those floodplains are essential habitat for many species, and they also help to manage sediment, how sediment sorts. They help to replenish groundwater and keep creeks or streams running later in the year. They help mitigate flooding to downstream communities by kind of taking the pressure off. And so with many partners, we have been reconnecting creeks to floodplains, restoring well over 100 acres of wetlands along just Butno Creek alone. The photo on the right here shows you when a creek is not disconnected. You can see when that water comes up in a storm, how it would spill out onto that adjacent land. The top photo on the left here shows a project that we just after construction, after it was completed, that basically graded the land down to reconnect with the grade that the creek had become after it had cut down over time. And the bottom left is when it just started to reconnect. When the storms came, the creek meandered out, it started to reconnect. Now we're seeing these braided channels and all these beautiful formations and great habitat beginning to form. And there was a question that was in the chat about what does wood in creeks do? And I was happy to see that, because a lot of our work has been to put wood back in creeks in many locations throughout the watershed with many partners. In nature, healthy creeks are typically messy creeks, and trees falling into creeks is natural, but those trees in myriad ways provide sources of food. They help to sort gravels, including making really great places for fish to spawn, to lay their eggs on these gravel areas. They help to carve out, they alter the hydrology of the water so that it carves out deeper pools, which are refuge, particularly when the water gets low and they're colder water and oxygen rich. These also provide refuge when the creeks are high, and so fish and don't get blasted out of the system by like a fire hose of a creek. They provide a lot of complex benefits. And so a lot of our work has been to reintroduce wood in a system where wood had been removed. And then in Pescadero watershed, water supply is really limited and local. There's no water utility here. There's no snowpack. There's no state water project. Low stream flows threaten fish and wildlife, and also domestic and agricultural water supply. So working with farms and ranches and small private water companies, domestic water companies, we've done a number of water conservation and water use efficiency projects, creating winter water storage so we can divert from the creeks when they're high. So like, for example, this creek right here, when it's high, and then, oops, sorry about that. Let's see if I can go back. So when it's high, and then the farmer can irrigate from that reservoir when the creek is low. There's the creek right along this farm field as well. And these are creeks that have anadromous fish in them. And this gives farmers water security, and it also protects stream flow for protected species. And so there we go. I mentioned before removing barriers like dams. One of our primary partnership efforts with NOAA, all of these projects really have been partnership efforts with NOAA, a restoration center, and others in NOAA. But one of the most significant barriers in the watershed that we needed to address was actually sediment that filled Butno Creek, where it enters Pescadero Marsh, which is a state natural preserve, or a large section of Butno Creek. The sediment deposited here because of accelerated erosion upstream from how the watershed had been managed for many decades, more than 100 years, and that those disconnected floodplains that weren't storing sediment, and then those exposed banks that were accelerating sedimentation. So it all dumps out basically on this road into town. And then this whole area essentially transitioned into forest, which meant that the creek ceased to exist. So our dredge project, the Butno Reconnection Project, dredged and removed sediment in this reach of creek, and then beneficially reused it on site in the marsh where former excavation pits and channels had contributed to poor water quality that caused annual mortality events for steelhead trout. And where the water came downstream and hit that wall of sediment, it also created chronic flooding of the primary road to the town of Pescadero and all these adjacent private properties. So the water was still coming downstream, but the creek ceased to exist. And in the lower right here, what you see is one of the many, many casualties of the poor water quality conditions with those annual mortality events that we really wanted to address. The reason that I bring up the flooding is because multi-benefit projects that integrate community concerns with habitat restoration can really open doors for other essential habitat restoration work, like this one. We're moving forward right now with a project that goes across about 23 properties in town, Pescadero, to address property owners' concerns about bank failure and erosion and flooding while restoring habitat to get the fish through town to this high-value upstream habitat. Many of these landowners are giving up their property, laying back the banks and giving some of their property up to the creek. And previously they only saw armoring banks as the solution to their concerns. And seeing that there are solutions, demonstrating that we can address community concerns, that there doesn't have to be a choice between environmental protection and community protection, has really opened the doors to being able to get work done at scale. So put it all together. That was let me say, put it all together, and what you get is resilience. This was a quick snapshot of a subset of many projects that we and many partners are working on. And when you put it together, you get restoration at scale. And that results in resilience in a lot of different metrics, whether it's thriving wildlife and ecosystems, mitigating natural disasters, protecting water supply and properties and agriculture. A lot of this has to do with mitigating climate change. And the way that we've been able to do this at the scale and at the pace that we have been able most recently has largely been through some of the new tools that have been developed under Cutting Green Tape and some previous tools to accelerate restoration. The Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Act that provides 1,600 permits and endangered species compliance, programmatic biological opinions, primarily the one that we partner with NOAA on the Restoration Center, and then NOAA secured a consistency determination with the Coastal Commission so that in one fell swoop, we can programmatically have completed our biological opinion and our coastal development permit for compliance with a number of requirements. The new statutory exemption for restoration projects under CEQA that I'm sure Brad Henderson will talk about. One of our floodplain restoration projects was one of the first to use that tool. We regularly use existing CEQA exemptions for small scale habitat restoration projects. New tools that have come out of the State Water Resources Control Board to streamline 401 certifications and compliance with that. And in the last few years alone, using these tools has saved us, we estimate, about $500,000. That is, instead of just spending that on permitting, has gone into more restoration projects and more effort in having robust, excellent technical designs with all of these agency and technical partners helping make sure that we have really good projects. So that is my share for today. And thanks for letting us highlight that watershed.
Incredible. Thank you so much for presenting that entire watershed and resilience and how it all comes together, and you're thinking at a landscape scale and really bringing the partners together to make that happen. So we're at one of the most exciting parts of the webinar, which is the Q&A. So if I can ask all of our panelists to come back on the screen, I would appreciate it. And folks have been dropping questions in the Q&A box. If you've got those, please continue to do so. But while people are putting those in there, I'm going to tee up one that I saw come across a couple times, and that is the importance of economy in these local areas. You know, many of you touched in your conversation about either workforce development, durable economic opportunities, or even making these projects make sense for the communities that are experiencing flood impacts. So I'd love to hear from you. How important do you think this economic component is to the success and the long-term durability of the work you're doing? And then how intentional were you at the beginning of your project design and thinking through like, oh yes, I need to have an economic component here for it to be successful? So the question originally came through the chat for Ben and Roz. So maybe I'll start with you and then pass it to the other panelists to have them add their thoughts.
Yeah, I could start, and then Roz, if you have anything you want to add, feel free, if that works for you. Yes, I mean, the economics of it are very important. I mean, some of the challenges we have in terms of scaling up the work that we're doing under Redwoods Rising and accomplishing more acres and more, miles of road removed per year are related to the economy, limits on the number of logging trucks that are just available, mill capacity to take some of the logs that are coming out of these restoration projects, the availability of rock to stabilize our roads so that we can get into these areas. So it's all part of a larger economic picture of that we consider kind of part of this restoration economy that we're trying to build. And so we're trying to build that in ways that we can, the things that are within our control. We can't necessarily control the number of logging trucks that are available, but we can build our relationships with our contractors and provide a little bit of longer term stability for them so that they can hire staff and have kind of certainty that we're going to be working with them for the long term. We can do things like the apprenticeship program to build workforce that can be, can bring into the agencies to support the work that happens on the ground. And we think it's really significant, the restoration economy concept that we're building here. And so we actually commissioned a study just this year to describe the socioeconomic impact of the work that we're doing. And that should be finalized this year. So it's definitely a big part of the work that we're doing. And we're continuing to think about different ways that we can structure that as we move forward and build a broader restoration economy around this project.
Great. Tristan, Pike, could I have you speak to that a little bit from the kelp forest work you're doing?
Sure. Pike, I can start, and then if you want to jump in, great. Megan, I really like the way that you framed, like, was it intentional? And yes, it was intentional, very much so. I think the desire to recover any habitat needs to come from a place of like desire from the community. And then you very much think about who is going to physically do the work, like who's going to think about the work and who's going to be in the water doing it. And so, I think who does that work is a question. And then, they're very, there are compartmentalized pieces here where a bunch of different folks could engage. But I think of interest, like where we're based, here in coastal Mendocino, we're a rural community, right? And then as we've heard from logging, we have this habit of extractive relationships with earth, right? Within the last like few hundred years, where for this community, for example, we had lumber, right? And that industry failure. And then we also had salmon and all these other fisheries. And so kind of like the desire and to do kind of this in-water kelp recovery work was to also engage the red urchin fishery, who was also very deeply impacted by the loss of kelp. And so they filed for federal disaster relief funds, and so that kind of like took apart like who would physically do the work. And so right now, as part of our approach, we very purposefully engaged the California Sea Urchin Commission to take on that the in-water harvest of purple sea urchin, because they're, they have all the gear to do that work. They're prepared to do that work. They can be in the water for like 4+ hours at a time, so that's kind of like where we're at right now, is trying to really shift, I think, with the city, with these blue economy efforts that we're doing, kind of shift like what kind of workforce opportunities are available for folks, given where they're at in terms of their industry or even, their interests and skill sets.
Did you want to add on before I pop to the next question?
Yeah. Thanks, Tristan. That was a really excellent breakdown, describing the benefits of kelp restoration on the North Coast. And just thinking about it statewide, we're very concerned with having this climate resilience conferred by these biodiverse and prolific kelp forests. And from our perspective in the nearshore environment, the vast majority of our fisheries have some direct relationship with kelp forests. And so when we think about this workforce development, when we think about bolstering coastal communities, we're definitely thinking about those fisheries. And I won't get into the seaweeds now. I'll talk till the cats come up about how excellent kelp forests are. But I will say that I've read papers that suggest that the carbon signature from giant kelp is found in tuna landed thousands of nautical miles away from California. So the benefits are far-reaching, and we're definitely thinking about that when we think about this kelp forest restoration work.
Great. And I just think that's really interesting feedback for practitioners on the line, that thinking through community and economy is a key piece on durability here. Another theme of questions that we're seeing come up quite a bit is how your projects have gone about engaging both community and then also tribal entities and communities and also how you're incorporating priorities or knowledge from those groups into the work that you do. And perhaps I'll ask Kellex and Joe to kick this one off, because you talked some about how to make these projects actually work for some of the communities that are in that watershed.
Sure. In this area, there are no tribes that have federal recognition. And so the Native individuals or organizations often incorporate as a 501c3. And we typically believe that, you know, compliance with AB 52 or Section 106 consultations, these things that require consultation should be the very last step. So we try to involve Native individuals and organizations in developing our priorities, having design input, telling us what they'd like to see done, making sure that we include them in grant applications and that to do capacity building for them, that we ask for their input on who they would like to do the cultural resource monitoring when there are projects. That sort of thing. It's a relationship and it's ongoing and it's always iterating for us. We also ask, we have something called, there's a collaboration called the Integrated Watershed Restoration Program that is a partnership of the Coastal Conservancy and the RCDs of San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Monterey counties that include all of the resource agencies and tribes to identify their priorities and give direction and design input to advance the highest conservation priorities. So they are at the table with the other state and federal and local agencies in establishing those priorities for restoration.
Awesome. Awesome. Joe, anything to add to that or any of the other panelists?
Yeah, just, you know, real quickly, I mean, you don't have, we have a multitude of projects to get done to recover species and stuff. And you literally, you will not have a project if you do not engage either the, you know, one, the landowner, but really the larger community and stuff, and engaging the larger community and getting a plan, kind of a shared vision of, and being very transparent about what you're trying to accomplish and working with it in that community is really paramount to doing all of this work and stuff like that. So.
Megan, may I please just note for people that panelists are not able to respond to your questions in the chat. So if you have a question that's going directly to any of us, please put it in the Q&A and then we can respond.
Great, Kellex, thank you for saying that. And, you know, just in light of time, letting folks know that there were a lot of questions that came in the Q&A. I did try to pull the ones that had themes. We are recording them and we will try to follow up on the ones that we can here. We are about to move to our lightning round. So I just, you know, to set that up, I actually wanted to ask Roz, like you went through a list of streamlined permitting things that you used in Redwood Rising. And I feel like that's a good setup for our next section of just to ask you, you know, how did you learn about these? How did you go about finding them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question about how does anybody learn about these things really, because I think it is a complex network of permits. And so I think it is about agency relationships. And here on the North Coast, we're really fortunate that it's kind of small. And so we kind of know everyone in one way, but I think that there's also, you know, just reading the regs. I think that when in doubt, read what's there and then creating and managing and maintaining the agency relationships and talking about the projects. I think one of the benefits that we see for Redwoods Rising is that, you know, we had Cal Fish and Wildlife out on site at Redwoods Rising a few years ago. Well, we do yearly site visits. But in one of the times that we were doing that, you know, we started talking about the East Fork Mill Creek floodplain restoration project. So that bridge, that floodplain project and just kind of like, so I think it is talking about, maintaining those relationships, thinking about people's time and trying to make it meaningful.
Wonderful, Roz. Well, that is a perfect setup for our next section. So I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to all of you who joined to present today, and also for the great work that you're doing on the ground. It was incredibly inspiring to hear about, and I know that a lot of our audience took some key lessons learned from this. So thank you so much for your time. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Madeline Drake. She is the Assistant Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat here at California Natural Resources Agency. And I feel incredibly lucky to have her as a colleague. She has helped build and lead the 30 by 30 pathway strategy and continues to be really essential to the implementation of this work. So Madeline, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you so much to all the speakers so far who have highlighted their stories of successful partnerships that have increased pace, scale, and it sounds like quality of environmental restoration here in California. I feel very lucky in this role to get to hear about inspiring stories like these, but I also know that this is just a sampling of what's happening across the state. So thank you all who are on this webinar who participate in restoration work around the state. We really appreciate everything you do. As many of you hopefully know, 30 by 30 is about so much more than just meeting that 30% goal. It's making sure that those lands and coastal waters that we're conserving are meeting those key objectives that Megan shared earlier to protect biodiversity, expand access to nature, and mitigate and build resilience to climate change. Restoration and stewardship play a really key role in making sure that we're meeting those key objectives of 30 by 30. For this next section, we're going to be doing a lightning round of sharing resources that can be useful to partners in accelerating restoration and stewardship. And you will get to the opportunity to hear from 3 wonderful speakers: Brad Henderson from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Jake Shannon from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and Erica Lovejoy from Sustainable Conservation. So first up is going to be Brad Henderson, who is the program manager for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Cutting Green Tape program. Brad has been with California Department of Fish and Wildlife for over 20 years and has worked throughout California in the work that he's done. Today, he will share some of the really cool resources that are available through the Cutting Green Tape program, many of which we've already heard a sampling of today. So over to you, Brad.
All right. Thanks so much, Madeline. Hi, everybody. I'm Brad. I am really happy to be here. And I have the honor of leading CDFW's Cutting the Green Tape program. We're now at about 2.5 years in, and I just absolutely love California and its incredible diversity. And I'm going to share a few resources with you today. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you a little bit about our website really quickly here. And so if that's up and running, which it should be in a moment. Did I just show the wrong screen? No, I'm good. All right. So this is our homepage. This is the Cutting the Green Tape website homepage. And this page has news, announcements, links to Watershed Restoration Grants Branch, which is the program or the branch of the department that I'm within. Our program, Cutting the Green Tape, is sort of a hybrid between granting and permitting. And so you'll find out all kinds of things here if you visit this page. We have news, announcements, links to restoration permitting tools, as well as pathways to connect with other restoration resources and partners. We have links to our granting resources as well. And we're also cutting green tape in our granting programs by implementing a new centralized rolling application platform for all of our restoration grant funding initiatives. And most recently, we've awarded around $200 million for projects addressing drought and climate impacts, as well as nature-based solutions. So this greatly simplified application process has enabled us to award and issue grant agreements for over 100 new projects within a 12-month timeframe, which is about 4 times as fast as what we used to be able to do before. And so that's this page. We're going to move now to our contacts. And we have a small group of folks, including myself, in headquarters. We also have 9 regional support staff in regions 1 through 5. That's 5 of our 7 regions. All their names are here. Feel free to reach out to these folks. Unfortunately, at the moment, we do not have staff in region 6, which is the desert, region 7, which is the ocean. So feel free to reach out to our restoration permitting inbox, and we can try to connect you up with someone there. Moving on to another tab. This is one of our main restoration permitting tools. You heard a little bit about this from Roz and Redwoods Rising. This is the Restoration Management Permit. This is a new tool that's really designed for larger projects that cover take authorizations for fully protected species and species listed under the California Endangered Species Act. This permit really kind of picks up where the small habitat general order 401 certification and the small habitat restoration enhancement act programs kind of leave off. There's no size limit on restoration management permits, and they are free. They don't cost a thing. Moving on to another restoration permitting tool. This is something called the Restoration Consistency Determination. This is another way for a project to gain coverage so that they can move out of harm's way, pick up, or in some cases, kill, if it has to be that way, protected species. And sometimes that has to happen because restoration, in order for it to do the most good, really needs to happen where these species live. A coho stream, like Pescadero Creek, for example, sometimes you got to get in there and do the messy work of restoration. And so when species are listed both under the Federal Endangered Species Act as well as the State Endangered Species Act, there's a very expedited, and again, for voluntary restoration projects, free process that will enable you project proponents to get CISA take coverage in a very, very short time frame. And we're talking about 30 days here. The next tab I'm going to share has a lot of information. This is the CEQA statutory exemption for restoration projects, otherwise known as SERP. And this is a very powerful CEQA exemption that will again cover large projects and sort of can pick up where the categorical exemptions for small projects leave off. And so this site has all kinds of resources, tips and tricks, things to know, the statute, as well as one of my favorite parts here is the example projects where you can actually see how a CEQA lead agency determined that a project meets the exemption, but also can see how the Department of Fish and Wildlife concurred with that lead agency. So lots of great stuff here and lots of projects to look at and all over the state as well. And so the next tab I'm going to show you is a program that's been around for almost 10 years now. And this is not something that we manage directly. This is the Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Act. This is still managed out of our Habitat Conservation Planning Branch and headquarters, but it's still just as powerful as ever for small projects. And as was mentioned earlier, this is an umbrella permit that can cover lake and stream alteration as well as take of protected species. And Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Act has a limit of 5 acres or 500 linear feet of stream. In the old days, a few years ago, you'd see a lot of projects that were 4.99 acres and 499 linear feet. Now we don't have to worry about trying to shrink a project to fit a tool. We actually have all these other tools that I just mentioned. And then finally, the last tab I'm going to share with you are our story maps. And you'll see that we have projects all over the state. These are all cutting the green tape projects that have been permitted or received CERP concurrences in the last 2.5 years or so. And if you just continue to scroll down this page, you can see the various different tools with their own maps. And that map will take just a second to load. But you can see the geographic diversity and lots of habitat diversity as well, including everything from the desert, to the coast, to the Sierra. And I like to say, we cover from the Salton Sea to the Smith River and everything in between. And if we continue down here, we'll just pick Pescadero Creek. How about that one? I will click on that, and that will bring up a few photos, a brief project summary, and who the partners were on each of these projects. And so that's a great way to learn about your options if you have a project that you're putting together, and you can kind of see all the different types of projects, all the different critters that are benefiting from these tools. So that's SERP. Here are restoration management permits. And again, we can just pick something. I'll pick Malakoff Diggins. That's a state parks project. And again, we have information. Some projects are huge, some are smaller. This one's only 1.2 acres, but they needed to take coverage, and there were some special circumstances for this small project where they couldn't fit under HREA, so we were able to accommodate that through a different tool. And sometimes
Awesome.
these tools might seem a little bit confusing. There's a lot of them, but we have choices. And so if you need help, just ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. Really appreciate everything that you and your team is doing. Definitely recommend checking out the different links that were shared. I love a good story map, so I'm excited to go look into it more today. Thank you so much, Brad. Next, I would like to introduce Jake Shannon and welcome him to the screen. He is the Restoration Coordination Specialist from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. In this role, he works to develop improved permitting tools and processes to better support restoration, and he's always available to help find progressive yet practical solutions to regulatory barriers to restoration. Over to you, Jake.
Thank you. Am I successfully sharing my screen?
You are.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here today. So I've only got 3 minutes, and the message that I hope to convey in the next 3 minutes is that the water boards, we now have a very comprehensive regulatory toolbox to support restoration, like Brad said, for CDFW. And we're excited to use it. And our staff are here to help guide you through the regulatory process and not just impose it upon you. So I encourage everyone to take screenshots of these 3 slides that I have to share, and please reach out anytime if you want to take a deeper dive into this information. So this is likely and hopefully a mixed audience, so I'm going to minimize the use of technical jargon and acronyms to the extent possible. I'm going to keep this pretty high level. This shows a summary of our 3 primary restoration permitting pathways, and our permits and the CEQA compliance tools that they rely upon generally bin projects based on their project size. And we kind of have these 3 bins. And our restoration permitting tools have been designed to work in tandem with other agencies' restoration permitting processes, like the Habitat Restoration Enhancement Act that Brad mentioned, the statutory exemption that Brad just mentioned, as well as NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife's programmatic BOs, like I think we discussed earlier. And then the main take home is kind of like Ben mentioned earlier when he was talking about Redwoods Rising. It takes kind of a village, and there's all these different key players and roles involved in the project team. Our staff really do want to be, considered a meaningful member of your project team to help you navigate the regulatory process. So this list shows the points of contact for the 9 regional water boards as well as the state board. So you should be able to look at that blurry map and kind of figure out your realm and your fiefdom and where you work and the folks that would overlap with you from our agency. These may not be the specific people that you will work with, but they'll be the best point of contact to line you up with the right staff person. And I think I can stop right there. Please reach out to me anytime. I'm really into this and I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake. Really appreciate all the work you and your team are doing and for sharing those really helpful resources. Next up, I would like to welcome to the screen Erica Lovejoy. There we are. Thank you, Erica. Erica is joining from the statewide nonprofit Sustainable Conservation. She is the director of Sustainable Conservation's Accelerating Restoration Program. Her team has been involved in helping agencies and project implementers develop efficient restoration permitting tools like programmatic permits, and they have a lot of great resources to share with you. So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, Erica.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Madeline. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. So I'm going to make this really fast. Again, Erica Lovejoy with the California nonprofit Sustainable Conservation. And our accelerating restoration team has been helping the agencies and project proponents with a number of the efficient permitting resources out there. And we also provide technical resources to help roll them out. And you've heard a lot about these different programmatic permits and other things that are out there. And folks are trying to put the pieces together on how to best use them. And we have resources to help you out. First, I want to let you know about our brand new Accelerating Restoration website. And this has information on all of the different restoration specific permitting tools in one place. So it's going to provide details on the different permitting pathways, which types of projects can use them, how they can be used together, and more. And the agency folks have chimed in on this. So they've verified the information, so we won't lead you astray. And there's a lot of tips that we've provided on how to successfully permit your project. And we also have another important resource on there that I want to let you know about, and that is our environmental protection measure selection tool. And what makes this really cool is it helps you check out all the potential protection measures from a lot of the new programmatic permits that are out there and figure out which ones might apply to your project. You plug in the project activities, the type of species that may be present, and it gives you a number of different measures. It'll give you a head start working with the agencies and planning your project. People also love our essential permitting guide. It's a snapshot table with all of the different authorizations and hyperlinks to the agency applications. And you can contact our friendly team here for technical assistance on these different authorizations at restoration.suscon.org. We provide free technical assistance to give you insights on some of the different efficient permitting pathways that might work for your project. You might know Stephanie Falzone. She was the mastermind behind our website. Then Katie Haldeman is also a very seasoned permitting expert. Contact these folks, and then you can sign up for our newsletter, get more info, be a part of our surveys that help guide the work that we do in the policy and permitting arena. Thank you very much to all our funders who make this happen. We always appreciate and want to appreciate them. And then use the new tools, everybody. We hope these resources are useful for you, and thanks for all the good work that you do. Thanks, Madeline.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica, for sharing those great resources and tools with everybody. And big thank you again to Brad and Jake. Really appreciate you guys joining our webinar and sharing these great resources. And I hope they're really useful to all the partners who are joining us today, and that we have even more success stories in the future. Before I turn it over to Megan, I do have one very last thing to share. For those of you who might be interested in joining a community of practice that meets regularly, focused on stewardship, ecosystem restoration, and landscape resilience, I wanted to share that the California Biodiversity Network, who is one of our key partners focused on advancing science that will inform 30 by 30, has a stewardship roundtable that is open to anyone to join. So we've added a couple links in the chat for anybody who might be interested in joining that roundtable. And I think there they are. They're the links. So now I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who's going to share parting words and next steps.
Incredibly brief parting words. Thank you all for hanging out a couple minutes longer to listen to that incredible lightning round of tools. And also, thank you so much for the work that you're doing as part of the 30 by 30 movement. We are all part of making this happen. Hope you can take something from this and use it on the ground to achieve your work. With that, have a great day, everybody.